It was a chilly morning when Emma wiped the last table at the corner cafe. The smell of coffee and fresh muffins filling the air. She had been working since dawn, her hands moving quickly, but her face carrying a soft smile. She was used to long hours and tired feet. Life had not been easy for her, but she tried to keep her heart warm even on cold days. The cafe was small, cozy, and always busy with regular customers. Emma knew most of them by name, and they knew her as the cheerful waitress who never seemed to run out of kindness. That morning, a man she had never seen before walked in. He wore a black suit, his shoes polished so well that they almost reflected the light. His face looked serious, maybe even a bit sad, though he tried to hide it behind his phone. He moved with confidence, but there was something heavy in his eyes. Behind him came a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, in a wheelchair. The boy had a gentle smile and big blue eyes that sparkled when he looked around. His small hands trembled slightly as he tried to hold a toy car. Emma noticed them right away. The man seemed important. His clothes, his watch, his calm but distant way of speaking to the hostess made it clear he wasn't from around there. The boy, however, drew Emma's attention for a different reason. There was innocence and loneliness in his eyes. When they sat near the window, Emma took their order with her usual friendly tone. "Good morning," she said softly. "What can I get for you today?" The man didn't look up from his phone. "Coffee. Black," he replied shortly. Then he glanced at his son. "Ethan, what would you like?" The boy hesitated, his voice small. "Can I have orange juice, please?" Emma smiled warmly. "Of course you can. Orange juice coming right up." She turned away, but something about the pair made her heart ache a little. The boy looked so fragile, and the father so far away even, though they sat just across from each other. When she brought the drinks, she noticed Ethan struggling to hold his cup. His fingers shook, and a bit of juice spilled on the table. His father frowned slightly, but didn't move to help. He was already back on a phone call, his voice low and controlled. Talking about meetings and investments, Emma didn't think twice. She took a napkin, knelt beside Ethan, and gently wiped the spill. "It's okay," she said with a bright smile. "Happens to everyone. Here, let me help you." She held the cup steady as Ethan took a sip. The boy's smile returned, shy but grateful. "Thank you," he said softly. "You're welcome, sweetheart," Emma replied. "You have a strong spirit, don't you?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "My teacher says that too," he said proudly. Emma laughed, her voice light and caring. She asked about his favorite color, his school, and his toys. He answered with growing excitement, his small voice filling the quiet corner. For the first time that morning, the boys' laughter echoed through the cafe. Across the table, Drada's father lowered his phone slowly. His call ended, but he didn't start another. Instead, he watched in silence. It had been months since he had seen his son laugh like that. Usually, Ethan's days were filled with therapy sessions, private tutors, and long hours of quiet. Richard told himself it was all for his son's good. But seeing Ethan now smiling because of a stranger made him feel something heavy inside his chest. Emma continued chatting with Ethan while cleaning nearby tables, making him giggle with silly stories about customers who couldn't decide between pancakes or waffles. Every now and then, she'd glance at Richard, but he never said much. Still, she noticed the tiredness behind his calm face. There was love there, buried deep beneath the layers of control and distance. When their food arrived, Ethan tried again to hold his fork, but his fingers slipped. This time, before Emma could reach out, Richard moved quickly to help. But Ethan looked nervous, his eyes darting toward his father's serious expression. Emma stepped closer and smiled. "May I show you a little trick, Ethan?" she asked. The boy nodded eagerly. She wrapped a napkin gently around the handle of the fork to make it thicker and easier to hold. "There," she said. "Now it won't slip so easily." Ethan tried again, and this time he managed to pick up a small piece of pancake. His joy was immediate. "I did it." Emma clapped softly. "See? I told you you could." Richard said nothing at first, but his gaze softened as he watched his son eat happily. "Thank you," he said quietly, almost as if it surprised him to say the words. Emma smiled. You don't have to thank me. He's a wonderful boy. Richard nodded, then looked out the window for a moment, his thoughts distant. It had been years since his wife passed away. He had built walls around himself, focusing on his company, on making sure Ethan had everything money could, buy doctors, therapies, tutors. But in all of that, he had forgotten the simple things, like laughter, like connection. When they finished eating, Emma brought the bill, placing it gently on the table. Take your time, she said kindly. No rush. Richard opened his wallet and slipped in a few large bills, far more than the cost of the meal. Emma frowned slightly and tried to hand some back. Sir, that's too much. Keep it, he said firmly, but not unkindly. You've been very kind to my son. She hesitated, then nodded with a small smile. Thank you. And thank you for bringing such a sweet boy. He made my morning. As they left, Ethan turned in his wheelchair and waved. Bye, Miss Emma. Bye, Ethan. Come visit me again, okay? She called back. Richard stood at the door for a brief second, watching the way she smiled at his son like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't pity or obligation, it was genuine warmth, something he hadn't seen in a long time. When the door closed behind them, Emma stood for a moment by the counter, lost in thought. There was something about that man and his little boy that touched her heart deeply. She didn't know their story, but she could feel pain beneath their quietness. She sighed softly and went back to clearing tables, though her mind stayed with the boy's bright eyes and trembling hands outside. As Richard pushed Ethan's wheelchair toward their black car, the boy chattered excitedly. Dad, did you see? She made the fork easier. I could eat by myself. Yes, Richard said, glancing down at his son. His voice was softer than usual. I saw. She's really nice, Ethan continued. Can we come back tomorrow? Richard didn't answer right away. He looked back at the cafe's window, where he could still see Emma moving around, smiling at customers. Something stirred inside him, something unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. It wasn't just about good service or kindness. It was the way she looked at Ethan, as if he were perfectly whole, just the way he was. He took a deep breath and opened the car door. Maybe we will, he said quietly. As they drove away, the little cafe faded from view, but not from Richard's mind. For the first time in a long while, found himself wondering about a stranger, not about her background or her life, but about the way she made his son happy. And somewhere deep down, he knew this wasn't the last time he would see her, inside the cafe. Emma hummed softly as she wiped another table. Life would go on as it always did, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this ordinary morning had been special. She had met a boy with the sweetest heart, and his father, a man who looked like he carried the world on his shoulders. She didn't know it yet, but that simple act of helping a child hold his cup would change her life in ways she never imagined. Richard could not stop thinking about the waitress from the cafe. The image of Emma's gentle smile and the way she talked to Ethan stayed in his mind long after they left. He had met many people in his life, business partners, investors, employees, but no one had ever looked at his son the way she did. Most people either avoided eye contact or looked at Ethan with pity. But Emma looked at him with pure affection, as if his disability didn't matter. That was something Richard couldn't forget. The next morning, while having breakfast with Ethan at home, Richard noticed how cheerful his son was. Ethan talked endlessly about the nice lady at the cafe who helped him eat pancakes and made him laugh. His little hands waved in the air as he described everything in detail. She said, I'm strong, Dad, Ethan said proudly. Do you think I'm strong? Richard smiled slightly, sipping his coffee. Yes, I think you are, he said. You're the strongest boy I know, Ethan giggled. Can we go there again? Please, Richard hesitated. He rarely went out to small places like that. He was used to high-end restaurants or having meals at home. But when he looked at his son's eager face, he couldn't say no. Maybe this weekend, he replied softly. Ethan's eyes sparkled. Promise? Richard nodded. Promise. For the first time in a while, he felt a strange warmth in his chest. It wasn't just because of the cafe, it was because of how happy his son was. Ethan's laughter reminded him of his late wife Clara, who used to bring light into every room. After her passing, everything had changed. Richard buried himself in work, believing that success would fill the emptiness. But all it did was create distance between him and Ethan. That evening, Richard sat in his study, surrounded by papers and glowing computer screens. But he wasn't reading any of them. His thoughts kept returning to that cafe and to Emma. Who was she? Why did she seem so familiar, so kind? He didn't like feeling curious about strangers. In his world, people usually wanted something from him: money, favors, or connections. But she had treated him like an ordinary customer, and she had looked at Ethan like he was just a boy, not a billionaire's son in a wheelchair. The next afternoon, after finishing a meeting earlier than expected, Richard decided to take a small detour. His driver looked surprised when he said, "Take me to that cafe from yesterday." When he entered, the bell over the door chimed softly. Emma was behind the counter, tying her apron. She looked up, her eyes widening slightly when she recognized him. "Oh, you came back," she said, with a cheerful tone. "And where's Ethan today?" "He's at school," Richard replied, walking toward the counter. "I was nearby." Emma nodded, smiling. "Coffee again?" He gave a small nod. "Black, thank you." As she prepared his drink, Richard watched her move around easily, greeting other customers, refilling cups, laughing at small jokes. There was something peaceful about the way she carried herself, something honest. When she brought him his coffee, he asked, "You've been working here long?" "A few years," she said. "It's not fancy, but I like it here. The people are nice." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "You're good with children," Emma smiled, remembering Ethan's laughter. "Thank you. He's a wonderful boy. Very polite, too." There was a short silence. Richard stirred his coffee, though he usually drank it plain. "You made him happy," he said quietly. "I haven't seen him smile like that in a long time." "Ah," Emma's voice softened. "He just needed someone to listen, I think. Kids can feel when someone truly sees them." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He realized how often he had been present physically but absent emotionally. Work had consumed him so completely that he had forgotten how to just be a father. Before he left, he asked casually, "What's your name again?" "Emma," she replied, smiling. "Thank you, Emma," he said, "for being kind to my son." When he stepped outside, he pulled out his phone and called someone from his staff. "Find out more about a woman named Emma who works at the corner cafe," he instructed. "No, nothing invasive, just background information." His assistant was surprised. "Yes, sir." "May I ask why?" Richard hesitated, then said, "She might be able to help my son." Later that week, Richard learned that Emma lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. She worked two jobs, one at the cafe and another cleaning offices at night. She didn't have a family of her own, and her record showed no debts or issues. She seemed like an ordinary woman living a simple, honest life. That impressed him more than he expected. The following weekend, he took Ethan back to the cafe. The moment they walked in, Ethan's face lit up. "Miss Emma." He shouted with joy. Emma turned around, surprised but delighted. "Well, look who's here. My favorite little customer." Ethan laughed as she came over and knelt beside him. "Did you miss me?" she teased. "A little," he said shyly, grinning. Richard watched them again, quietly, the same warm feeling returning. There was something beautiful about the way she made his son feel seen. Emma didn't rush him, didn't correct him, didn't treat him like he was fragile. She simply let him be himself. During the meal, Richard found himself observing more closely. Emma moved from table to table, but she always took a few extra seconds to check on Ethan. Each time she did, Ethan's smile grew wider. Richard couldn't help but think, what if Ethan had someone like her around more often? Someone who could bring light back into his days. After they finished eating, Richard asked Emma if she had a minute. She looked surprised but nodded. They stepped aside near the counter. "I hope this doesn't sound strange," he began, his voice calm but serious. "Would you ever consider working with children outside of the cafe?" Emma blinked. "You mean babysitting?" "Not exactly," Richard said. "My son needs someone patient, someone kind." His therapy helps, but he responds better to warmth than instructions. I was wondering if you'd consider being with him a few hours a week. I can pay you well. Emma stared at him, clearly unsure. Sir, I don't have experience as a professional caregiver. You don't need to, he replied quickly. You've already helped him more than most people have in months. Her eyes softened, but she looked hesitant. I don't know. I already have 2 jobs, and I'll make sure you're compensated fairly, he said, his tone gentle now. You wouldn't have to worry about the cafe. I'll speak to your manager. Emma was quiet for a moment. She looked across the room where Ethan was playing with his toy car, laughing. Then she turned back to Richard. All right, she said finally. I'll try. But only if Ethan wants me to. Richard smiled faintly, something rare for him. I'm sure he will. As they left, Ethan waved goodbye again, his joy shining brighter than ever. See you soon, Miss Emma? Emma waved back, her heart fluttering in a strange way she couldn't explain. She didn't know why a billionaire wanted her to help his son. But when she saw Ethan smile, she knew she couldn't say no. That night, Richard stood by Ethan's bedroom door, watching his son sleep peacefully. There was a softness on his face that hadn't been there in years. For the first time since Clara's death, Richard felt something close to hope. Maybe this woman, this ordinary waitress, was about to change not just Ethan's life, but his own. Emma's life began to change quietly after that day. A week after Richard made his offer, she found herself standing at the large gates of the Bennett mansion, holding her small handbag nervously. She had never seen a house so big in her life. The tall iron gates opened slowly. The long driveway curved through a garden filled with flowers, fountains, and trimmed hedges. It looked like something from a movie, not real life. When she rang the bell, a kind-looking housekeeper opened the door. You must be Miss Emma, she said with a smile. Come in, please. Mr. Bennett and Ethan are waiting in the garden. Emma nodded politely, though her heart raced. She walked through the bright, quiet hallways, her shoes clicking softly on the marble floor. She felt out of place. Everything looked perfect, polished, clean, expensive. She wondered what she was doing there. A simple waitress among such wealth. When she reached the garden, she saw Ethan sitting in his wheelchair under a tree, a blanket over his legs. He looked up the moment he saw her and waved excitedly. Miss Emma. She smiled, her nervousness fading. Hi, my little champ, she said, walking closer. You look comfortable out here. I was waiting for you, he said happily. Dad said you were coming today? Richard was sitting nearby, reading something on his tablet. He looked up and gave her a small, polite smile. Thank you for coming, he said. I wasn't sure you'd agree. Emma shrugged lightly. Well, Ethan's hard to say no to. Richard gave a quiet chuckle, something rare for him. That's true, he said. Then he stood up. He'll be in your care for the next few hours. I'll be inside if you need anything. As he walked away, Emma knelt beside Ethan and whispered, So, what should we do today? Ethan's eyes brightened. Can we draw? I like drawing, but my hands get tired. Of course we can draw, she said. And I'll help you when your hands get tired. He spent the afternoon sketching in the garden. Emma guided his hand gently when he struggled to hold the pencil. Together, they drew trees, birds, and even a crooked-looking dog that made them both laugh. Every time Ethan's hand trembled, Emma would say, It's okay, no rush. Look how beautiful it's turning out. From the living room window, Richard watched quietly. He wasn't used to seeing Ethan so relaxed. Usually, when therapists came, Ethan would grow tense, afraid of making mistakes. But with Emma, everything seemed easy. Her patience filled the space like sunlight. The next few days turned into weeks. Emma began coming regularly, sometimes 3 times a week. She would help Ethan with his exercises, read stories to him, and even bake small cupcakes in the kitchen when he felt bored. Her laughter filled the mansion, something that hadn't happened in years. One afternoon, while Emma was helping Ethan walk a few steps in the hallway, Richard came home earlier than expected. He paused at the doorway, watching as Emma encouraged Ethan with gentle words. One more step? That's it. You're doing amazing. Ethan giggled as he leaned on his walker. You sound like my teacher, he said. Well, "Then your teacher must be very smart," she replied with a grin. Richard smiled without realizing it. For the first time, the house didn't feel so cold anymore. After Ethan went to rest, he found Emma in the kitchen washing her hands. "You've done a lot for him," he said quietly. "I can see the difference." Emma looked up, surprised. "He's the one doing the hard work," she said simply. "I'm just cheering him on." Richard leaned against the counter. "Still, you've managed to reach him in a way no one else has. I've hired therapists, specialists, but he never responded like this." Emma smiled softly. "Sometimes kids don't need professionals, Mr. Bennett. They just need someone who treats them like they're enough." Her words struck him again. Simple, but true. He realized she had a way of seeing people as they were, not as the world labeled them. For a man who measured everything in results and numbers, her way of seeing life was something new. Over the next few weeks, Emma became part of their daily routine. Ethan adored her. Whenever she arrived, he would shout her name from across the room. The housekeepers began to smile more. Her laughter was contagious. Even Richard found himself waiting for her visits. He would sometimes join their games or sit quietly nearby, just to listen to the sound of his son's laughter. One day, as the three of them sat in the garden having lemonade, a butterfly landed on Ethan's hand. He looked at it in wonder. "It's so small," he whispered. Emma smiled. "See how still you are? It trusts you." Richard looked at the two of them and felt something stir inside him. For years, he had believed that happiness came from control, from success, but now, watching them, he realized happiness could be simple. It could be a butterfly landing on your child's hand. Later that evening, after Emma left, Richard found himself thinking about her again. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was something warmer, deeper, something that scared him a little. He hadn't felt that way since Clara. He told himself it was just gratitude, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. The next day, he asked Emma to stay for dinner. "You've been working with us for a while," he said. "It would be nice to share a meal together." Emma hesitated. "I don't want to intrude, sir." "You're not intruding," he said gently. "You're part of this household now." At dinner, Ethan sat between them, chattering about his favorite cartoons. Emma laughed at his jokes, while Richard watched her with quiet appreciation. There was an ease between them that words couldn't describe. For the first time in years, the dining table felt alive again. After Ethan went to bed, Emma gathered her things to leave. At the door, Richard stopped her. "Thank you," he said softly. "Not just for what you do for Ethan, but for what you've brought into this house." Emma smiled. "He brings it out of me. He's special. So are you," he said almost under his breath. She looked up surprised, but before she could reply, he added quickly, "Drive safely, all right?" She nodded, still smiling. But her heart was beating faster than usual as she walked away. In the weeks that followed, Richard's feelings only grew stronger. He found excuses to talk to her more, sometimes joining her and Ethan for games, other times walking her to her car at night. There were moments when their hands brushed, and both pretended not to notice. Yet something unspoken grew between them, gentle, hesitant, real. Emma tried to ignore it. She reminded herself that he was her employer, a billionaire with a world far different from hers. But every time she saw him looking at Ethan with softer eyes, she felt her heart shift. She had seen him change, less work, more smiles, more warmth. It was like watching winter slowly turn into spring. One evening, after a long day, Emma sat beside Ethan as he dozed off during a bedtime story. Richard stood at the doorway, watching the scene quietly. The golden light from the lamp fell on Emma's face. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace. When Emma looked up, their eyes met for a brief second. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. Outside, the night was calm, and the stars shone bright above the Bennett mansion. None of them knew it yet, but this simple bond they had built, born from kindness and laughter, was about to be tested by something neither of them saw coming. It was a quiet evening when everything suddenly changed. The sky outside the Bennett mansion was turning dark, clouds gathering as if something heavy was about to happen. Inside, Emma was helping Ethan finish a drawing on the living room table. They had spent the afternoon painting a picture of the garden, a big tree, bright flowers, and a small butterfly sitting on a leaf. Ethan's smile was wide as he showed it to her. "Look, Miss Emma, the butterfly is me," he said proudly. "And that's you under the tree." "Ah!" Emma laughed softly. "And where's your dad?" Ethan pointed at a tall figure in the background of the drawing. "That's him. He's always watching us from far, but he's smiling now." Emma looked at the little picture for a moment. Somehow, the child's simple words touched her heart more deeply than she expected. "It's beautiful, Ethan," she whispered. "You're such a good artist." Suddenly, Ethan's face grew pale. The brush slipped from his hand, and his body began to tremble. Emma's heart jumped. "Ethan? Hey, what's wrong, sweetheart?" He didn't answer. His breathing became quick and uneven. Panic filled her chest. She shouted for help. "Mrs. Harris?" She called to the housekeeper. "Call Mr. Bennett now." Within seconds, the quiet house turned into chaos. Emma knelt beside Ethan, holding his small, shaking hands. "It's okay, honey. I'm right here," she said, though her voice trembled. She remembered the emergency instructions Richard had given her. But seeing Ethan struggling like that made it hard to think clearly. Richard came running into the room, his face pale. "What happened?" "I don't know. He was fine, and then he just—" Emma's voice cracked as she held back tears. "He can't breathe properly." Richard didn't waste a second. "Get the car ready," he shouted to the staff. He lifted Ethan into his arms, holding him close. The boy's body was limp against his chest. Emma followed, her hand shaking. At the hospital, doctors rushed Ethan into the emergency room. Emma stood near the wall, her heart pounding. Richard was beside her, pacing restlessly, his face filled with fear. For once, he didn't look like a powerful man who controlled everything. He looked like a desperate father, helpless and scared. Hours passed like years. Finally, a doctor came out. "He had a mild seizure," he explained. "He's stable now, but he needs rest and further tests." Relief flooded through both of them. Richard sat down heavily on a chair, running his hand through his hair. Emma covered her face and whispered, "Thank God." When they were allowed inside, Ethan was sleeping peacefully, his small hand resting on the blanket. Emma sat beside him, gently brushing his hair away from his forehead. Richard watched her silently, his eyes softening. For the first time, he truly saw her not just as the kind woman who helped his son, but as someone who cared deeply, almost like a mother would. After a while, he stepped out to speak to the doctor. As Emma sat quietly by Ethan's bed, one of the nurses came over and smiled kindly. "You must care about him a lot," Emma nodded. "He's a special boy."
Ow!
The nurse tilted her head. "You remind me of someone. I think I've seen you here before. Maybe years ago?" Emma looked surprised. "You might be right," she said softly. "My brother used to be treated here. He had muscular dystrophy." The nurse's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that," Emma nodded sadly. "He passed away. It was sudden, like tonight. I was just a teenager then. He was only 10. The nurse squeezed her shoulder gently and walked away. Emma looked down at Ethan, tears filling her eyes. Memories of her brother came rushing back, his laughter, his struggles, the way she used to sit beside him during hospital nights. Helping Ethan had brought all those feelings back, but this time, she wasn't losing him. She couldn't. When Richard returned, he noticed her wiping her eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, I just remembered something." Richard sat beside her, his face tired but calm. "You've been incredible tonight. I don't know what I would have done without you. I just did what anyone would do," she said softly. "No," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Not everyone would care the way you do." Emma looked away, trying to hide her blush. "I care because he reminds me of someone I lost." Richard's expression softened even more. "Your brother?" he asked carefully. She looked at him in surprise. "How did you—" "The nurse mentioned it," he said. "I'm sorry." She nodded, her eyes distant. "He was sick for years. I took care of him until the end. When he died, I promised myself I'd help others like him, no matter what." Ethan. He feels like part of that promise. Aditya looked at her with quiet admiration. He finally understood why her kindness felt so deep, came from pain, from love that had never faded. It wasn't charity or duty. It was her heart speaking. For the next few days, Emma stayed by Ethan's side in the hospital. Richard came and went, managing calls and updates, but she never left. When Ethan finally woke up, the first thing he said was, "Miss Emma." She smiled, tears filling her eyes. "I'm right here, sweet boy." He smiled weakly. "You stayed with me?" "Course I did," she whispered. "I'll always stay with you." Richard stood in the doorway, watching the moment quietly. His heart felt full, grateful, emotional, changed. This woman had not only healed his son's loneliness, but also reminded him what it meant to care deeply. She had brought light into both of their lives that evening, as Emma was leaving the hospital. Richard caught up with her near the parking lot. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "You saved my son's life." Emma shook her head. "No, the doctors did. You did more than they did," he said softly. "You gave him something even medicine couldn't hope, joy, confidence." Emma looked at him, her eyes shining. "He gave me something too, Mr. Bennett. He reminded me that love doesn't have to end just because someone's gone." There was silence between them, heavy with emotion. The wind brushed her hair softly, and Richard felt something inside him break open. "You've changed us, Emma," he said. "Both of us." She smiled, though her eyes glistened. "And you've changed me. You and Ethan gave me a reason to believe again." For a moment they stood there, two people from completely different worlds, connected by one small boy and a shared sense of loss and healing. It was quiet, but it was powerful. As Emma drove home that night, she felt tears roll down her cheeks, but they weren't sad tears. They were tears of release, of love, of something beautiful growing out of pain. She didn't know where life would take her next, but one thing was clear. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was part of something bigger, a family that had needed her as much as she had needed them. After Ethan recovered from his hospital scare, life at the Bennett mansion began to feel different, warmer, brighter, and softer. The heavy silence that had filled the halls for years was gone, replaced by laughter, chatter, and the small chaos that comes with children. Emma's presence had become a part of the household, not just as Ethan's helper, but as a source of joy that the mansion had long been missing. Every morning she would arrive with a cheerful greeting, and every evening she would leave with Ethan waving happily from the doorway. Her laughter had become like sunlight in the house, filling corners that had once been shadowed by grief. Ethan's confidence grew day by day. He started to try new things, walking a little farther with his walker, drawing bigger pictures, even attempting to feed himself without spilling. Emma would encourage him patiently, guiding his hands, praising his small victories, and celebrating his effort rather than just the results. She always reminded him, gently, that it was okay to make mistakes. "Every mistake is just a step closer to success," she would tell him. Ethan's smiles became more frequent, his laughter more genuine, and his eyes sparkled with the joy of being seen, loved, and understood. Richard watched all of this quietly. He saw the transformation not just in his son, but in himself. He had spent years buried in work, thinking that financial security and perfect planning could replace love. But watching Emma with Ethan, he realized how wrong he had been. Love, care, and patience could heal wounds that money never could. He found himself spending more time at home, joining their little activities, reading stories aloud, and sometimes even playing silly games with Ethan. The mansion that once felt like a cold museum now felt alive. The walls seemed to echo laughter instead of silence. One evening, Richard returned home earlier than usual. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light across the garden. He saw Emma kneeling beside Ethan as he tried to balance a small toy airplane in his hands. She was encouraging him gently, her hand steadying his when he wobbled, her voice soft and patient. Ethan's eyes sparkled with determination and happiness. Richard felt a lump in his throat. This woman, simple, kind, patient, full of heart, had changed his son's life in ways he could never have imagined. Richard stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mind if I join?" he asked quietly. Emma looked up and smiled. "Of course, sir. Or should I say, Richard," she teased gently. He smiled faintly, though a warmth spread through him he hadn't felt in years. "Yes, I suppose I'm just Richard here," he said. He knelt beside Ethan, who immediately reached for him. "Dad," he exclaimed, laughing. Emma's presence made the moment feel easy, natural, and full of love. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between the three of them grew stronger. Richard found himself appreciating Emma's presence more than he could explain. He noticed how she would adjust to Ethan's moods, how she instinctively knew when to step in, or when to give him space. She had a way of making everything seem lighter, even the difficult moments. Watching her care for his son, Richard felt gratitude mixed with awe. She wasn't just helping, she was healing, and somehow he felt that she was healing him too. One quiet afternoon, after Ethan had gone to nap, Richard found Emma in the kitchen, cleaning up the dishes from lunch. The sun streamed through the windows, lighting her hair in a soft glow. He walked over and leaned against the counter. "Emma," he said gently, "you've done more than I could ever ask for. You've changed our lives." Emma looked at him, a small smile on her lips. "I just wanted to help Ethan, that's all." "No," Richard said firmly. "It's more than that. You brought joy, hope, and warmth into this house. I don't know what I would have done without you these past months." Emma's cheeks flushed slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means a lot." Richard hesitated for a moment, then added softly, "And not just Ethan. You've changed me too." Emma looked at him, her eyes wide. "Changed you?" "Yes," he said, his voice calm but sincere. "I used to think life was all about work, money, and control. But watching you with Ethan, you reminded me what really matters. Love, patience, laughter, being present. I had forgotten all that." Emma's eyes softened. "I'm glad I could help," she said gently, though she felt her heart flutter in ways she hadn't expected. There was something in Richard's voice, in his sincerity, that touched her deeply. As the days passed, life became a rhythm of small joys. Emma would help Ethan with his exercises, read bedtime stories, and encourage him to try new things. Richard would join when he could, sometimes playing board games, sometimes helping Ethan with his homework, sometimes just sitting quietly and enjoying the laughter. There was a sense of peace in the mansion, a sense of family that had been missing for years. One sunny morning, the three of them sat in the garden, having breakfast on a blanket. Ethan was happily nibbling on a muffin while Emma poured him some juice. Richard watched them, a small smile on his face. He realized how far they had all come. Ethan's confidence, his laughter, and his love for life had grown. Emma's patience, kindness, and dedication had made this possible. And somehow in the process, Richard himself had grown more patient, more present, more human. "Look at this, Dad," Ethan shouted, pointing to a small butterfly resting on a flower. "It's beautiful." Emma leaned closer. "See? It trusts you, Ethan. You're very gentle." Richard nodded quietly. He reached out and let the butterfly land on his finger. "It's amazing," he whispered. "Sometimes the smallest things are the most beautiful," Ethan giggled. "Just like Miss Emma." Emma laughed, ruffling his hair. "I'll take that as a compliment," she said. That evening, as the sky turned pink and orange, Richard called Emma aside. "You've given Ethan so much more than anyone could," he said. "But you've given me something to hope, peace, and a reminder of what's really important. I want to thank you." Properly, Emma looked at him, curiosity and emotion in her eyes. "Richard, you don't have to." "I do," he said softly. "You've become part of our lives. Not just a helper, but... And I want you to know that your place here is always safe, always welcome." Emma's heart swelled. "Thank you," she said quietly. She didn't know how to explain the emotions flooding her: gratitude, love, and a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. Over the next few months, life settled into a happy rhythm. Ethan continued to thrive under Emma's care, laughing more, learning more, and exploring the world around him with curiosity and joy. Richard became more involved, spending time at home, prioritizing family over work, and slowly learning to live in the moment. The mansion, once silent and cold, now echoed with laughter, conversation, and love. One afternoon, as Emma and Ethan were painting in the garden, Richard stepped outside with a small cup of lemonade for each of them. He watched them from a distance, feeling a quiet happiness he hadn't known in years. He walked over and handed the cup to Emma. "To new beginnings," he said softly. Emma smiled. "To happiness," she replied. Ethan raised his cup, grinning. Two friends. They clinked their cups together gently. In that moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. All that mattered was this small, imperfect, beautiful family they had built together as the sun set, casting long golden shadows across the garden. Richard looked at Emma and Ethan. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for his son, for Emma, and for the chance to see life differently. Emma felt it too, the sense of belonging, of love, of purpose. Ethan, unaware of the deeper emotions around him, laughed freely. Chasing a butterfly that had landed nearby, they had all been changed by kindness, patience, and love. A simple act holding a trembling child's hand had set off a chain of events none of them could have predicted. Lives that had once been lonely and broken were now intertwined in the most unexpected and beautiful way. And for the first time in a long while, the mansion felt like home in the quiet moments. When the laughter faded and the stars appeared in the sky, Richard whispered to himself, "Thank you, Emma." And though she didn't hear it, Emma knew in her heart that their journey together was only just beginning. Life had given them a second chance, not just to heal, but to grow, to love, and to cherish the simplest joys dashed together if you want. I can combine all 5 parts into a polished, single, continuous short story of about 5,500 words, keeping it simple, engaging, and emotional, ready to read like a real-life inspired narrative. It would flow smoothly from beginning to end without headings. Do you want me to do that?